Hello, everyone. A very good morning, afternoon, and evening to all those who are joining us on this launch event, Greening Humanitarian Assistance, Donor Priorities and Practical Guidance. So before I continue with introductions, just a few technical and housekeeping details so that you are ready to follow this event. So the webinar is in English and we have live translated captions. To see these, please select the closed captions, the CC option. You might need to click on the more button with the 3 dots on your menu bar, where you will need to then select the language of your choice and captionings. Thank you. And on this, a kind reminder that English may not be the first language of all participants, so we do ask everyone to speak clearly. We will be recording this event. It's already started, and it will be uploaded on the Charter Events webpage. We'll have a Q&A time for participants, so please do share your questions in the chat box once the speakers have started providing their input and interventions. If you have a specific question for a particular speaker, please do indicate which one. And please do share and introduce yourself in the chat until we kickstart everything. So moving on to introduction, my name is Nishani Jayamaha. I am joined by Natasha Westheimer, my colleague and co-coordinator of the Secretariat for the Climate and Environment Charter for Humanitarian Organizations. This event is co-organized with the facilitators of the Donor Greening Group, DGG, and we are joined by Fiona Cook and Samantha Branchion. And for those who may not be aware of the Climate and Environment Charter, it was developed for the humanitarian sector by the sector, and to date it has been signed by over 475 organizations ranging from local, national, regional and international NGOs, National Red Cross and Red Crescent societies, the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, UN agencies, think tanks and academia. And the charter consists of 7 commitments that acts as a framework for humanitarian organizations to be more climate smart and environmentally sustainable in our programs and operations. So the first 2 commitments act as the backbone of the charter. Commitment 1 calls on us to step up our response to growing humanitarian needs and help people adapt to the impacts of climate and environmental crises. And commitment 2 calls on organizations to maximize the environmental sustainability of our work and rapidly reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So while today's discussion is very much focused on commitment number 2, in line with the principle of do no harm and to minimize our impact and the damage we cause to the climate and environment, the launching of the common donor priority actions on greening humanitarian assistance and the environment sustainability guidance today comes at a time where the humanitarian sector and the multilateral system as a whole are at crossroads. We are seeing an unprecedented loss of lives, not only due to climate impacts, but also due to conflicts leading to grave humanitarian consequences, such as what we see in Gaza and the Middle East, Sudan, Ukraine, Syria, Myanmar, Sahel, the Great Lakes, and so many other forgotten crises. With this ever-changing landscape, the sector is definitely struggling to meet rising needs in an era of funding cuts leading to UN and sector reforms. The humanitarian reset is going back to basics and focusing on life-saving needs. So therefore, it is timely that we convene this discussion to hear from donors and practitioners alike what challenges and opportunities lie ahead as we navigate how we can be more sustainable, minimize our impact on the environment and climate, while prioritizing saving lives in the context we work. So we will start this event by launching both the donor priority actions on greening and the environmental sustainability guide. And we'll hear from donors and have some time for Q&A session. And then we will unpack what it really means to practically implement these priorities. And for this, we will hear from charter signatories and partner organizations on how they are already working towards actioning these priorities. what are those challenges and lessons we can learn from their interventions, and how are they doing this on the ground in various contexts. So to kickstart this launch, I now hand over to Fiona Cook, the co-facilitator of the Donor Greening Group. Over to you, Fiona.
Thank you, Nishani, and hi to everybody. Thank you for joining us from all parts of the world. Thank you for our donors to be here. Perhaps just before I introduce the priority actions, I just wanted to say a word about my role and that of Samantha, my colleague. We have the pleasure of facilitating a donor greening working group. The group has been around for about 1.5 years, and it's basically for donor coordination and joint action on greening. There's 7 donors who are members of the group, although membership is open to others. I'd say the members are those that are perhaps some of the most invested in greening in terms of their funding for sector-wide initiatives and projects to learn more about how we can reduce the climate and environmental impact of humanitarian assistance. And they're perhaps some of the most ambitious in terms of how they're asking their partner organisations to integrate greening. All of our members have signed the Donor Declaration and support the Climate Charter that Nishani was mentioning earlier. And we decided as a group to work on these priority actions. Just before we look at sort of what they are and how they came about, I wanted to say that this has been, quite a process. We thought originally that it's something we could perhaps achieve within 6-9 months, and it's taken us a little bit longer, which is a good sign. You might actually recall we had a similar webinar to consult with humanitarian actors last year. And the priority action started life as the common donor greening principles. So you might remember that. And I just wanted to thank you all for being involved in that consultation and to all the work that's gone into putting together what we're going to see today. So maybe just to say, if you want to look at we're going to present the actions themselves. There's 10 of them. But if you want to read kind of the explainer text and a little bit in more detail, you can actually find the full document online. So if you use QR codes, there's a QR code there you can scan, and we'll also put the links in the chat. Next slide, please. So Nishani mentioned it a little bit. We perhaps won't go into too much, but just to say that, now more than ever, we need to work to sort of preserve everything we've achieved with regards to greening and not kind of, with this idea of going back to basics, not step back in time. We've come a long way. The sector has come a long way. So let's work to try and maintain those. And I think it's important to recall the co-benefits of greening. So obviously it's, about reducing climate environmental impacts, but there are also, benefits of doing that. So one of them is the increased operational efficiency and reducing costs. So we know things like solarization, although it might cost a bit upfront, it does in the long term lead to savings, or even the medium term. And another example is, for example, reducing air travel. We know that by moving to business, from business to economy flights, we can save not only emissions, but a significant amount of a budget as well. And obviously, when we talk about life saving, greening does help that in some ways, conserving livelihoods and supporting natural ecosystems in fragile and conflict settings. There's also, this matches with the localization agenda. So we're investing more, we're saying people should fly less because we want to build capacity of local or regional experts. That's the localization agenda. And also, stimulating local markets, working with local suppliers or let's say small or proximity suppliers to green, the items that they supply. That's also supporting the localization agenda. And we know things like moving over to clean cooking has environmental benefits, but also protection benefits, health benefits, etc. So I think we can go to the next slide now. So what are these priority actions? They were developed by the Donor Greening Group to enhance coordination and drive collective action on greening. They're about achieving, concrete environmental and climate outcomes, but also supporting effectiveness. So things like, by mutualization of efforts with warehousing, transport, we can actually be more effective working together. They are aligned and build on ECHO's minimum environmental requirements. You might actually recognise some of them from the MERs. And they also reflect that the common ambitions that some donors who have signed up to the donor declaration are actually already reporting on. So things like donors are already reporting on their progress with regards to phasing out diesel generators, plastics, and that kind of thing. So it's aligned with that, and it also helps donors to concretely achieve or contribute to implementation of commitments 3 and 4 of the declaration. The idea is also to try and speak, maybe not say with one voice, because each donor and each organisation has its operational realities, but certainly to try and give a more unified and coherent message from donors to their partners. We hear from partners, well, X donor is very focused on bioplastics, Y donor is very focused on waste management. So this is perhaps just a way of donors to align a little bit more. Just to say as well, it's not an exhaustive list. It's not that, this is the kind of the minimum donors want. I mean, we'd like partners to strive towards more, but this is kind of a set of where donors would like to focus the priorities. So if organizations, are starting out, like, what are the 10 key things they should be looking at? So I think we can go to the next slide now. Thank you. So I'm not going to go into very much detail, but perhaps we could just take a quick look at some of the key themes. So priority 1 is around environmental assessments. Number 2 is about greener products and services. 3 about travel and transport emissions. 4 about sustainable waste management. 5 single-use plastics. 6 is looking at water exploitation and how we manage wastewater. The following one it's linked, but we wanted to have a specific priority action around water shocking. Clean cooking is also there, as it is in the MERs and elsewhere. Phasing out of fossil fuel generators, and finally sustainable food, preferably locally sourced food. So I think now it's the opportunity to really hear from the donors. I won't take any more time. Hand over to the donors to hear your point of view. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Fiona, for that overview. And we will turn to the donors who are part of the DGG to share their interventions now. And first, I call on Mrs. Lucia Prieto Rios, who is the Humanitarian Director from the Spanish Agency for International Development Cooperation, to take the floor. Over to you.
Thank you, Nishani, and thank you, Fiona and colleagues. I'm very happy to be here. I apologize in advance because I would have to leave shortly after that, but I'll be eager to know the results of the debate. I'm happy to take any questions through my colleague who regularly attends the donor working group. I just make a few comments on how these greening priority actions are being factored in our work in the Spanish agency. So we fully support the priority actions that have been identified within the donor greening working group, and they reflect already existing commitments and the direction that we have decided to take in the humanitarian action front. Our endorsement of these priorities also reaffirms a commitment as a signatory of the Climate and Environment Charter for Humanitarian Organisations. And is not new for us. We have already been working as an agency, both on the humanitarian front, but also on the development side on environmental sustainability. The 10 priority actions that will be shared align very closely to our strategy. And we have addressed them in subsequent publications of the agency that I'll be happy to share. There's the ISC, so the Spanish Corporation's Guide to Mainstreaming the Environment into Humanitarian Action and Emergencies of 2022, Water Tracking, Guide on Mainstreaming Environment and Climate Change, a bit older, 2015. And just to mention a few examples on how we're working to green our own direct operations, we do work within the Humanitarian Action Directorate both on direct operations plus funding partners. So on the direct operations, we are piloting solar energy, actually acquired solar energy autonomy on our rapid response mission. So basically the emergency, the field hospital that we have, having different capacity, is fully autonomous on solar energy. We use reusable and low impact packaging in our deployments. and we minimize single-use supplies wherever it's feasible. So that's encouraged also with our suppliers. On the funding side, we encourage that our partners do mainstream our guidelines on mainstreaming environment into humanitarian action, and we take that into account, for instance, when we are evaluating proposals from civil society organizations. Just a few more comments. For us, greening is not just a response to the climate challenges and risks, but we believe it has a strategic advantage in the long term. I know I would be preaching to the choir here, but let me just say that for us, we also see that as enhancing resilience of affected communities. Also, it has been mentioned earlier, working on the do no harm part of the interventions improves the long-term sustainability, and on the do no harm part, it also minimizes the unintended negative effect. So, I think the priority actions are useful in the sense that they give us donors a shared language and direction. So I think this is critical also to not puzzle implementing partners. It'd be useful to hear from you in what way this will be useful for implementing partners. But also to encourage innovation and investment in green practices. We have had a number of initiatives funded within the Spanish agency that fall on the innovation side. For instance, exploring the needs of sustainable energy for humanitarian operations that we have carried out with a Spanish NGO and a Spanish company, solar energy company. So, and also I think this is a space to harmonize and make useful and hopefully realistic expectations. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you so much for sharing what Spain is also doing and supporting the sector, and at the same time highlighting that resilience of communities can be actually developed and strengthened through environment sustainability as well. Next, we have the Director General for European Civil Protection and Humanitarian Aid Operations. DG ECHO has been leading on the donor declaration and is spearheading many initiatives on climate and environment action in humanitarian settings, including as a founding donor of the Charter Secretariat. So while we have Mrs. Hannah Jans, Director Strategy and Policy, who'll join us later to provide closing remarks, I call now on Mr. Frederick Squittiser, Deputy Head of Unit, Humanitarian Aid and Thematic Policies, to take the floor. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Nishani, and hello, colleagues. For DG, thank you for having the opportunity to make these few comments at the outset of the meeting. So for us, DG ECHO, subscribing to these common priority actions is important to send a positive message of encouragement to our partners. We are still here. This is still important to us. I think in these times, a number of things that we care for a lot are under threat or under attack. So I think it's important to send these kind of messages as well. As you also mentioned, Nishani, and as you know, colleagues, DG ECHO, we have our own minimum environmental requirements, and they are already in line with the priority actions. So in that, there's nothing much that changes directly for us. But again, we find it important to come together with the other key donors that are actively working on this file to give a common message. Spain, France, Switzerland, and Germany as a donor group. It's also important, as Lucia mentioned, to show that we are aligned. For us, the priority actions are also the concretization of commitments 3 and 4 of the donor declaration that you just mentioned, Nishani, which was co-conceived indeed between the EU and France. And as the de facto secretariat of the donor declaration, DG ECHO wanted to make these commitments, of course, more concrete. Each of the actions is for us rooted in pragmatism, is informed by best practices, and is also adaptable to the different contexts. So we are very happy to endorse these. And with these actions, we want to signal our collective intent to align our policies, to reduce duplication, and also to avoid any contradictions. Thank you very much. I myself will unfortunately also have to leave shortly for another meeting, but my colleague Carolina, which you know well, is staying behind in the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Skutiza. And absolutely, it's also to looking at how do we minimize duplication and work in coordination among donors and the sector alike. Thank you so much. And now we have an intervention from the Crisis and Support Center, CDCS, France, Mr. Pierre Saint-Lignon, head of the Humanitarian and Stabilization Operations Center. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the meeting, and to the Climate Charter Secretariat and to the Donor Greening Group for organizing this meeting and for coordinating the elaboration of these priority actions for the humanitarian response. We are pleased to speak today on these topics, which reflects the growing integration of climate and environmental issues in humanitarian action. A lot of progress has been made since 3 years, when we adopted the Donor Declaration on Climate and Environmental under the French presidency of the EU. Action priorities aim to operationalize the declaration. This discussion is especially important in the current context, marked by severe budget constraints and increasing pressure to prioritize humanitarian action. Now more than ever, we need to work together as donors and with all humanitarian partners to keep climate and environmental issues high on the agenda. We must make sure that the progress already made are not lost. We are convinced that greening humanitarian and aid contributes directly to improving quality of aid, leading to better assistance for affected population. As a humanitarian donor that not only funds projects but also carries out bilateral emergency logistical operations, CDCS see action priorities as a set of recommendations we strongly encourage all partners to adopt and also aim to integrate into our own logistic and operation practices in line with the French humanitarian strategy. Several of these priorities are aligned with commitments we already took and implemented. The supply chain workshops we hosted in Lyon, France, mid of May with DG ECO aim at developing a more strategic vision for the humanitarian supply chain. In this context, we co-organized a session with the UNHCR on the greening of supply chains. We notably discussed ways to reduce carbon emission from operation, strengthen life cycle assessments, improve waste management, and engage with the private sector. Supply chain equals more than 70% of carbon emission of the sector. So it is easy to understand, for example, why we think supply chain needs to be plastic-free. The action priorities adopted today are fully in line with those discussions. We also support the implementation of these priorities through a collective approach, encouraging joint initiatives and shared solutions to create economies of scale and streamline our efforts. Therefore, we call on both donors and humanitarian actors to support this collaborative approach through initiatives such as Cooperative Hello, which France and DG ECO are supporting today, but also Atlas Logistique, Bioport, Climate Action Accelerator, and other NGOs supporting health and nutrition programs, two important sectors when we speak about carbon emission. Lastly, as part of the ongoing humanitarian system reform, it is essential to ensure that climate is fully integrated into the discussions around the so-called humanitarian reset. France stands ready to contribute to building a shared narrative that keeps this key priority at the forefront. Once again, thank you to all donors who actively contributed to the development of these action priorities for the humanitarian response. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Salignon. Absolutely, it is important to keep climate and environment high on the agenda, especially with the humanitarian reset and the conversations and the sector reforms that are happening at the moment. And from the Swiss Agency for Development Cooperation, SDC, right now, we have another firm supporter of the Charter Secretariat online and also leading on climate and environment action. I call on Mr. Silvio Flukiger, Deputy Head of Humanitarian Aid and Head of Operations, to take the floor. Over to you.
Thank you, Nishani, and good afternoon, esteemed colleagues. Let me start by thanking you, Nishani, your team, and the organizers for bringing us together for this important launch. Much appreciated. On behalf of the Swiss Agency for Development Cooperation, I'm pleased to announce the endorsement of the 10 common donor priority actions and to reaffirm also Switzerland's commitment to greening humanitarian assistance. At our agency, we strongly believe that integrating climate and environmental considerations into humanitarian action is actually not a choice, it's an absolute necessity. This practical and hands-on initiative comes at a critical time, and various speakers have already mentioned it. Critical because today's environmental degradation is not only fueling humanitarian needs, but it's also undermining the long-term resilience of the affected population. And B, it is also critical because we face a very disruptive moment of the humanitarian system. Whether we like it or not, we must take into consideration this new situation and work with it. The humanitarian reset, with its pressure on resources, with its shifting priorities, poses, and let's be honest, a real challenge for the greening agenda. There is a possible risk that environmental concerns are pushed down on the priority list of humanitarian action. And yet, greening must not be seen just as a simple add-on, but as an enabler of a more sustainable humanitarian action. So that's why it's very critical to have, and what we need is practical, pragmatic, and hands-on measures. And that's actually what these donor priorities stand for. With their common endorsement, I am convinced that we send a strong signal of donor alignment on the one side and of shared ambition on the other side. So I'm very much looking forward to today's meeting and wish you and us very fruitful deliberations. Thank you a lot.
Thank you so much, Mr. Flukiger. Absolutely. These are practical and pragmatic actions that we will also share a little bit more later on how organizations are already implementing this on the ground. And of course, noting that it is not that integrating climate and environment is not a choice, but it is a necessity. That is definitely what we're hearing from our organizations and signatories on the ground. And now from the German Federal Foreign Office, GFFO, I call on Mr. Helge Holleck, Deputy Head of Division, Humanitarian Assistance and International Disaster Response, to share his remarks. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nishani. And as previous speakers, I would really like to welcome those 10 priority actions and thank you very much to the organizers. Germany is committed to greening of the humanitarian assistance, and you might remember that we were supporting the Climate Action Accelerator and held a launch of the roadmap of the Climate Action Accelerator here in Berlin in June 2024. So it is also part of our humanitarian strategy launched in September 24. So we really are committed to the principles of greening. And I hear also what Silvio said and Lucia, I think about the reset and the discussions and maybe also the that the principles of greening might be under pressure, but actually we discussed here in just a few days ago when I told colleagues in the other divisions about our priority actions and of the call today. we discussed this with the reset, and there was another colleague of the regional desk saying, well, actually greening can also be part of the solution, because I just had we just had project proposals where we had the options of diesel generators and solar panels, the result was that for a 1 or 2 years project duration, the diesel generator was the cheaper option, but then from 3 years of project duration, the solar panels were already cheaper. So we always have to, I think we can be really also offensively advocating for this principle that it's of course it could also be much more efficient and not speaking of the long run, but also in the short run. So I think, like Lucia and Frederick, I also have to run to other meetings, but Anke, our you know her well, our desk officer for greening, will stay in the call and will be will also stay until the end. And like Silvio said, we fully endorse also the priority actions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And absolutely, greening is also part of the solution. And we'll hear a little bit about this in the next round, where we have our signatories and partners sharing information. Right now, I'm going to hand over to Natasha. But in the meantime, I do ask everyone online to please share your questions for the donors, for also anybody else who's online, who are our speakers. But please do share your questions on the chat. We will have some time for Q&A. So right now I'm going to hand over to Natasha, who is supporting, who will be sharing how the Charter Secretariat is supporting signatories to tap into tools, guidance, and expertise, and launching the Environment Sustainability Guide. Over to you, Natasha.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Nishani, and thank you as well to the speakers and the donors for sharing more about their greening priorities. And as Nishani mentioned, this is really an important milestone for our sector. And it's one that offers an opportunity for signatories to also meet Commitment 2 of the Charter to minimize our climate and environmental impacts. And for many, taking this step may require all sorts of support. And for this, I get the opportunity to share a bit about the technical guidance available to support the sector in these efforts. The Charter Secretariat has recently published a resource on environmental sustainability in humanitarian action. This is the latest guidance page on our website, which is a broader platform for sharing the incredible collection of tools and resources for climate and environmental action in the sector that already exists. But before that, I just want to share a bit about why the Charter Secretariat is doing this. Nishani put a bit of framing forward on the second commitment of the Charter and its connection to this conversation. But what I want to highlight here is that the Secretariat was established to essentially be a support hub for the humanitarian sector to implement the Charter and implement its commitments, which is largely about capacity building. And there's a lot of capacity already in the sector, as well as with our partners. So as part of our work, we connect signatories to this expertise and these resources, whether that's through one-on-one support or webinars and workshops like this, our newsletters. And since we launched last May, we've been really working to understand how we can help the sector bridge some of the access gaps in technical expertise. And part of this, we've been identifying and mapping the tools and resources that exist. You'll see here a visual of the resources and platforms we've identified so far. Just a bit of background, this began with a mapping of expertise and a foundational assessment in 2021, updated again last year by Group URD with ECHO's support. And the Charter Secretariat have continued to expand and deepen this mapping, with our focus being really on trying to figure out how to organize it in a way and share it best with organizations to make it accessible. We have 330 plus resources ranging from tools, guidance documents, online learning opportunities, working groups, as well as some comprehensive resource libraries in and of themselves, which we will hear a bit about later as well. And very briefly, I'll just say about the platform, why we're publishing these resources as a series of guidance pages on our website, focusing on various themes. We'll curate these in a way that we have heard from signatories in various discussions that will be hopefully as accessible as possible in English, French, Spanish, and Arabic. We've published the climate and disaster risk reduction page earlier this year. And these pages will be dynamic. We'll continue to update them as the expertise in the sector evolves. But on environmental sustainability, we decided that in parallel to launching the donor greening priorities, it would be useful to publish the guidance on environmental sustainability so we can support the sector in the realization of these priorities, as well as commitment of the charter. And the QR code on this page and the following few pages will take you there. We've posted over 80 resources on this platform, on the environmental sustainability page alone, organized into the different categories you see here. There's 15 excellent resources on how to get started. What do we mean by greening? What are emissions reductions? How do we even start an environmental policy? There's a number of trainings and courses, all free to access. There are technical guides and tools and carbon calculators and environmental screening tools. One of the things we hear a lot from signatories is that communities of practice and working groups are really desired, and there's 13 different platforms for engagement on these different topics, and a number of platforms on these themes as well, such as the REC Coalition or the Climate Action Accelerator and the Global Platform for Action, that are touching on thematic areas within this that have their own comprehensive databases of tools and resources. I'll just touch on a few examples, and I'll go through them fairly quickly, but I encourage you to spend time on the website. Here's just an example on one of the getting started resources. The IFRC has a series of green response guides, including a green response environmental quick guide. It's while tailored for national societies, it's a good introduction to the themes of greening operation and what it means, and what are some of the ways organizations can approach this. Also available in different languages. There are a number of toolkits. The Climate Action Accelerator is a really important and useful platform here. It was set up to support the sector in reducing its carbon emissions and build more sustainable operations, and it offers a number of resources, including this collection of toolkits. These toolkits offer resources and strategies to help organizations adapt the way they're working. For example, the Good Office Practices Toolkit has a step-by-step process and a list of solutions for implementing environmentally sustainable offices. I really encourage you to check that out. There are also English and French resources. There are a number of learning opportunities to those who maybe like me really enjoy a good webinar or podcast. So I've just shown one example here. The CALP network has a recorded webinar on managing the environmental footprint of cash and voucher assistance, which would be really important for specific programs that signatories are operating. And as I mentioned, there's a real desire for coordination groups and working groups, and the REC Coalition, Catherine will speak a bit later. While there are many out there on this topic, there's 5 in particular hosted by the REC Coalition, focused on various elements of sustainable logistics, really also well suited for field staff, on green procurement and decarbonization. And there are other platforms like the Humanitarian Energy Exchange Network, which is hosted by the Global Platform for Action on sustainable energy access in fragile and displacement settings. So there's really a whole mix that could meet different needs. There are many different tools, from the NEAT Plus, which we did a webinar on last year, and the MIRA Matrix, which offer environmental screening and risk assessment. there's also toolkits, for example, on solarization. We've also pulled out different carbon calculators you could use. One of them is the Humanitarian Carbon Calculator, which is available in French and Spanish and supports in measuring and setting targets for emissions. And lastly, there are many, many case studies, and we're really excited by that. We've organized them into different topics. We've heard numerous times from signatories that learning what others are doing is how they want to learn, and it's a really incredible way to see what's working and inspire organizations to do the same. It's why we're excited to share this webinar. It's not just about the commitments and priorities, but it's about how we can take the experience on the ground and learn and grow as a sector. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Nishani for getting us moving through this next part of the webinar. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Natasha. We've got a few questions coming up on our chat. Thank you very much for all those who've been putting some questions. I would like to actually head one specific question, or maybe two even, to the donors. And the first one we've got is, beyond greening of organizations and operations, does the donor group have priorities around supporting communities on preparedness and adaptation to climate change in line with the Charter and, of course, the Donor Declaration? So that's one. And if any of the donors are moved to actually reply to that question, please do jump in. And the next question also is related to budget support, and that budget support for NGOs and local partners in terms of sustainable infrastructure. And as some of these are highly restrictive and costs quite high, is there a specific budget category that they could apply for? So if anyone is interested in answering that, until I look at some of the others coming through. Any of the donors interested in taking one of? Please go ahead. I'm not. Yes, Carolina, over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for your participation and questions. Of course, yes, other donors, colleagues, please do come in as well. Just speaking from ECHO's side here. So on the greening group itself, for the moment, we are focusing more on the environmental footprint, but of course, we are all supporters of the Climate and Environment Charter and signatories to the Donor Declaration. So these discussions are very much also happening in those fora, and we all work in one way or another on supporting climate resilience and disaster preparedness and adaptation in our humanitarian and development response. But this working group itself is more focused on reducing the environmental footprint, and we share various projects and initiatives, and these priority actions were also an outcome of this common work. So that's on that. And on the eligible costs, so when ECHO released its minimum environmental requirements, we also included at the beginning of our guidance documents some clarifications regarding eligible costs. And this is very much, yes, part of it. We have said that we are setting these requirements, and also we are prepared to pay the justified additional costs where needed, and especially where there is a return on investment, as we see so often with solar power, but also electric vehicles, but also more durable items that might be more expensive, but you don't need to purchase as often, and so on. So that's very much factored in. And also, I mean, not just the infrastructure cost, but I think worth mentioning is the technical support cost. So, sometimes you need to have a technical expert hired as part of the project to support this. This is very much also eligible for our funding. Over.
Thanks so much, Carolina, and that's great to hear. And our colleagues on the line, it is possible that there are costs that can be included on technical and programmatic and operational costs. So this is something to think about when you are doing your proposals. Anybody else from the donors who'd like to respond, please do jump in. And there is a question on the chat that Samantha, who's part of the DDG team, will also answer on chat. If not, if no other donors are jumping in, we can move on to our next session space. Okay, there's still space and time even afterwards. Yes, so now we will start unpacking the priority actions, and I saw some questions coming in on that on the chat. So we will tackle those in this round. And to do so, we will deep dive into three priority actions where organizations will share tools and guidance and how they've been implementing this in different contexts. So first up, we will have Catherine Ely, project manager of REC Coalition, and Arifur Rahman, who's the manager logistics and procurement from the IFRC Bangladesh delegation. And they will be sharing insights on priority action 2 and on a pilot case study on green procurement in Bangladesh. We are happy to have both the IFRC and the Bangladesh Red Crescent, who are signatories to the charter, sharing their experiences today. And next up, we have Samantha Brangion from the DDG facilitation team, who will unpack priority action 3, while Rosa Van Stein, development director, will share experiences from the Fleet Forum. And then last but not least, my co-coordinator Natasha will unpack priority action 10 with Madhumita Madhavan, the regional technical coordinator on climate and environment from ACTED, another signatory leading in the sector on greening, on how they are supporting communities with sustainable food production in Syria. But first, I will hand over to Fiona to provide an overview of the priorities, the 10 priority actions. In addition to what she had, there's a little bit more detail for those who want to find out. Over to you, Fiona.
Thank you, Nishani. So if we can go to the next slide, we can actually unveil the priority actions. Very exciting. If you just click on the first one, please, Natasha. Yeah, so that's priorities 1 to 5. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because, as we said, you can read the document online, and also colleagues are going to be unpacking some of these. But maybe just a few words on each. So someone in the chat was mentioning that the NEAT Plus had been taken offline, and I know Caroline has responded to that. But we're thinking of these kind of tools that exist. NEAT Plus is one of them. There are others that can be used really to sort of identify risks that should then be integrated as mitigation strategies when we're developing our project plans and our budgets, etc. And as I think we can also say that, you know, it's not just about identifying risks. There can also be opportunities, you know, not just to do no harm, but maybe to even do good. If we identify, you know, environmental opportunities, positive opportunities that can be seized, things like nature-based solutions, then this is also, you know, the stage of the project in which we can perhaps do that. And I think the key one for number 1 is that, you know, it doesn't just remain, sorry, a tick box exercise, or, you know, we have your assessment and then it's forgotten about, that it really like feeds into and informs the way the project is developed. Number 2, I'd say, you know, this is mainly about procuring relief items that have a lower carbon environmental footprint. Claire, you were asking a question about what do we mean by a proven low environmental and climate impact? I think, you know, we all tend to think about things like GHG emissions calculations and LCAs. I know Catherine will speak to these points, but perhaps one message I can say is that the donor group, you know, through this priority, we do not want to make it an obligation that organizations feel obliged to carry out LCAs for all of the items. We know it's it is time consuming and it's costly. So just to say there is a lot of existing data in the sectors, be it LCAs that other organizations have done or emissions. And so the idea is not to let, you know, the absence of perfect tools be an obstacle to progress. So, you know, organizations can prioritize. They can think, okay, what are the most, out of all the relief items we procure, where do we spend most of our money? And where are the most carbon intense, which are the most carbon intense items? And then think about, you know, starting to discuss with suppliers or other organizations, how those footprints could be reduced. Number 3, again, Sam and Rose will all unpack this one. But it's, yeah, thinking about things like reducing air travel, as I mentioned earlier, can be something that enables us to save money and also save emissions. It could also be about this sort of idea of increasing online participation, the need to take the plane and travel, we could focus more on perhaps reinforcing local and regional capacity. And then there's other activities that could be envisaged, prioritizing, doing better planning to prioritize low carbon freight, pre-positioning, and then we've got all the initiatives around pooled travel and sustainable fleet, which I know Rose will go into detail on. Waste management, so we should all be familiar with that. I think over the last few years, it's been, a really big focus with the REC project, et cetera, the joint initiative. But I think, part of this is we know that the most impactful measures are the upstream measures that avoid things becoming waste in the first place. I think there's a phrase, the best kind of waste is the one that's never generated. So things like, better planning to avoid over procurement, consumption, right sizing procurement, choosing more durable items that are not going to break down and need replaced, that can be used over and over, and then with the waste that we can't avoid, thinking of ways to dispose of that in a sustainable and responsible manner. The one on single-use plastics, I think it's one that certainly we've spoken about as the joint initiative and REC projects a lot. But yeah, thinking about reducing the unnecessary single-use plastics and packaging. Reducing unnecessary packaging and phasing out of single-use plastics. We obviously don't want to, encourage people to think that, for example, for certain medical items, we're saying to get rid of single-use plastics. It's really, to the extent that it wouldn't compromise the quality and delivery of humanitarian assistance. That being said, even in the medical field, there are great initiatives about the, reducing the utilization of single-use gloves. There's a whole load of things, projects that have been done and initiatives that have been trialed. So even for those kind of sectors, it is still possible. If we go to priority 6 now, 6 and 7 are really about wastewater and preservation of water resources. We do have a separate one on water chocking. I think it's, being used in certain contexts, perhaps not where it shouldn't necessarily be seen as a, something of a last resort, where alternative measures could exist. So really the idea is, if you have to use water chocking because the context requires it, then think already about the exit strategy from the start, so that it doesn't become a sort of a perennial thing. And to think more about, like long-term water infrastructure and investing in boreholes, rehabilitation of water systems. Number 8 on fossil fuels. So there's been a lot of discussion around this already. Again, it's, we recognize that in certain contexts, hospital settings where you need backup generators, it might be not possible to phase out fossil fuel generators immediately. But we can already think about things like right sizing of generators. I think it's the GPA that has a statistic that 60% of generators in use are actually too big for, they're over proportion compared to what they're actually needed for. And yeah, ultimately transitioning to green energy can save money and save resources. Cooking solutions, again, we've worked quite a lot with the GPA on this. There's a lot of initiatives that can be carried out. We know that cleaner cooking and solutions and services, brings about lowered emissions, but also health benefits. We talk a lot about, when we're providing food assistance, if we're not providing sustainable fuel, then there's, still this reliance on traditional practices, wood cutting and charcoal and that kind of thing. So, yeah, that's an important one to think about. With regards to number 10, this is one that will also be unpacked by our colleagues here today. But I think we just want to say that, we recognise, and I think it's the Climate Action Accelerator has come up with the figure of about 50% of the sector's emissions are from food and agriculture. And so as in terms of the clusters, we looked at the thematic sectors, food and agriculture is really a key one where we can look at, really reducing our footprint and having an impact. So that would be, encouraging the production and purchase of low carbon sustainable food, but also working with producers to improve their agricultural practices. So I'll let my colleagues go into more detail. Let's just look briefly at, who's endorsed these priorities. So which donors are we talking about? Well, it's basically the donors that you heard from today. So the 5 donors that are listed, if you go to the next point, Natasha, so we've got DG ECHO, SDCS, GFFO, ACID, and Switzerland. There's also a couple of donors that are in the process of validating these, so it's really exciting. And we encourage other donors to get involved as well. I think the more donors join, the more this effort, can enable mutual learning, alignment, and also help donors to implement their commitments under the donor declaration. So just to say again, if you want to see the priorities, they're now published on ECHO's webpage where the donor declaration is. You can scan the link. And at the end, we will actually circulate a survey where we want to hear from you about, what you think in terms of the feasibility of implementing these priority actions and areas in which you might need support and areas where you think you might already have existing resources. So yeah, I'm happy to hand over now to Catherine, who's going to talk us through priority 2. Over to you, Catherine.
Thanks so much, Fiona. And what a segue, I think. A lot of information there to take in. I will be sort of tackling and unpacking priority action 2, which is to prioritize products and services with a proven lower climate and environmental footprint. Next slide, please. So I liked one of the quotes that you said there, Fiona. It's one of my favorites, that the best waste is the waste that's never created. And I think that really ties back into this priority and really interlinks the two when we're talking about procurement and the prioritizing products and services. Next slide, please. As Nishani mentioned earlier, my name is Catherine Ely. I run the Global Logistics Cluster-led REC Coalition, and I just wanted to give you a little bit of information about why supply chains and sustainable supply chains are really important to talk about. There was a study that came out, research by the Climate Action Accelerator, actually, on the humanitarian sector's impact, and well over 80% of emissions come specifically from supply chains, and 40 to 60% of that is from goods and services alone. And if you look at the amount of greenhouse gas emissions and carbon emissions that results in from the humanitarian sector, it's equivalent to approximately a city with about the size of Barcelona, if you look at it. So about 1.5 million people in terms of the emissions and waste that's created. So if we think about that, and that's what we're putting onto the planet in terms of the humanitarian sector, something needs to be done about that. And I'm really happy. Next slide, please. I'm really happy that these commitments have been made and these priority actions have been developed. But we need to unpack it a little bit more. A lot of recommendations, I think I started this like 5-6 years ago, look at local procurement as the answer. Well, not necessarily. And I think that's one of the things that we need to make sure that we are sort of communicating with practitioners and partners and procurement professionals themselves, and making sure that it's quite clear. There are a lot of misconceptions about purchasing locally because the trucks don't have to come, the planes don't have to come, but they have potentially, probably, unless it's being manufactured locally, it's already happened. So we have the same objective of sustainable procurement, but in different markets, there are different opportunities and different approaches. Things can be more sustainable when production is done sustainably and when they're produced locally. And you have to be very careful here as well, because even if it's produced locally, that doesn't necessarily mean that the products are going to be more sustainable than purchasing a sustainable product that's manufactured internationally. So you can't always assume that local is always more sustainable. And I know that Fiona mentioned just a moment ago about the LCAs. That's a life cycle assessment. Life cycle assessments are fantastic. But as she also said, you can't let perfection be the enemy of the good. There are some practical things that you can do and that are being done by a number of different partners. And we see this every day in our green procurement coordination groups, in our conversations with partners. A lot of things can be done without that level of detail. LCAs are fantastic. They're a little bit of a snapshot in time. And they also take a really long time to develop with a lot of data, and they're data intensive themselves. So supplier matters. Some international suppliers already are advanced on greening, whereas smaller local suppliers may have the willingness, but not know really where to begin. They might not have the capacity. They might have their supply chain already quite well developed, and they're a local trader, for example, which is fine. So they just don't know really where to start. And I'll talk about that in the next slide in terms of actions that can and are being taken. But we need to understand that different suppliers have different possibilities to influence also the manufacturing and production processes. Larger suppliers, of course, international suppliers that are being used by large humanitarian organizations, they will have a larger purchasing power to go to manufacturers to change the specifications of things. I think we can see this already in a few examples. ICRC did the eco tarpaulin, for example, and that resulted in, lower emissions, lower negative impact, and also a lower cost, by the way, going back to the point about costs and procurement and more sustainable items. And so there are examples of that being done, but it does require an understanding of the market landscape. Next slide, please. Great. And a few things to highlight in terms of actions that make a difference. Engaging with suppliers, asking them to put in place different targets. They can be science-based, they can be based on other sustainability markers. But having that engagement for suppliers and the capacity strengthening for suppliers, it's really not about if your procurement team knows how to do green market assessments, that's great. But if they don't have that conversation with the suppliers, it's really going to go as far as we ask for it, but nobody has it sort of thing. And so it ends up being, and it risks really being one of those tick box exercises. So how do we prioritize goods and services in practice? It is a lot of it has to do with that conversation and the capacity strengthening, both for suppliers, humanitarian teams. It goes beyond just procurement and supply chains, of course, our program colleagues, our management, et cetera, and that supplier engagement at market assessments. For selecting products and services, costs matter, of course, but so does quality. You have to think about the total cost of ownership and return on investment. There was a mention earlier about how do we implement solarization in our facilities, because there's a high upfront cost. A lot of times, there are financing options available. There's a lot of different ways you can go about it, but you need to really have a look and dive a little bit deeper into it. Select suppliers which have environmental plans. I think DG and Carolina outlined this very briefly, but you can have weighting criteria for sustainable practices and products as well to include that into your procurement. So these are just some very, very brief, because I only had 5 minutes to introduce and unpack this, and I think I've already gone over time. So let me hand over to my friend and colleague, Mr. Arifur Rahman, who is working with the IFRC in Bangladesh. And I want to say thank you, Arifur. I know it's super late, but I'm really happy to hear about the work you've done on the market assessment, the green procurement market assessment in Bangladesh. So over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. Yeah. Can you go next slide? Yeah. Thank you all, and good afternoon, everyone. So today I'm here to share some of my experience about the pilot green procurement assessment that was conducted in 2024 in Bangladesh, and some steps taken towards making green procurement more than a policy term, making it real, practical, and possible. So now the question might be, why Bangladesh was the pilot? Because Bangladesh is a disaster-prone country, and multi-dimensional disaster or humanitarian crisis we are facing every year. So a different kind of natural disasters happen in the country every year. And recently we have experienced with the man-made civil unrest or humanitarian crisis as well. So all kind of humanitarian crisis we are experienced. And on this ground, actually, it was a right place to have a pilot. And I will discuss about the pilot procurement market assessment. So how we did it, like we have done the data gathering and also analyze the data and field work. And within this field work, we have done a collaborative approach with REC team. And thanks to Catherine also supporting in this pilot assessment. And what we assessed, like we assessed the market readiness, engaged supplier, asked different question to supplier, and looked for sustainable answers. And what we found was not just a gap, it's opportunity. And what we proved was that even in complex humanitarian settings, sustainability can and must be integrated into the supply chain. Next slide. Yeah, so key findings that I mentioned, like very few key findings I will explain here, like low supplier awareness on sustainability that we found widespread of use of non-recyclable materials like single-use plastic. Even some of the item specification are not like environmental friendly. High use of non-recyclable materials, hazard medical waste concern that already previous colleague mentions, and environmental impact for using of bamboos that are very significantly we are using in different refugee camps in Bangladesh. Next slide, please. And yeah, from that assessment, we had also some key recommendations like raise awareness, develop knowledge that we are already in, developing policies and SOPs, decarbonization plan and targets. Yeah, next. Advocacy collaboration, which is the most important part, I will explain later. Optimization, waste management. Yeah, next. So initiative that we implemented from that assessment, just to share that the strategy we have taken, we know that lots of things need to do, but we have done what is actually doable because we didn't want to engage ourselves with something complicated or what can make us fail. So we started from something which is doable and easy to achieve so that people will be interested, people will be motivated. So we institutionalized the sustainable procurement into the Bangladesh Red Crescent Society procurement policies and their manuals. We arrange some procurement awareness trainings with their procurement staffs, and also supplier engagement, which is most important part. Because as I mentioned earlier, that one of the key finding was low lack of awareness from the supplier end. So we have tried to engage them into our plan of actions and that we want to achieve. And also we reduce the use of plastics into our different supply chain activities and actions, and also mandatory eco regulations for construction tenders. So that we also introduce, which is a great part. And also paperless digital transition that we are implementing. It's a continuous process. Yeah, next. So some of the initiatives we also planned, which is on pipeline, and already some of them are implementing, like eco-friendly fleet. We not engaged ourselves into only procurement. So we also expanded to our fleet management, and also eco-friendly warehousing. So we didn't keep ourselves within these procurement activities, but also we try to enhance our capacity into eco-friendly fleet and warehousing. And on top of everything, like raise awareness is a mandatory and must, because it's not only the supply chain team that can make changes. We have to come up with from all different levels so that we can achieve our goal. Yeah, next, please. So key challenges, that is the important part. Yeah, during these limited activities, we have found that limited awareness that I mentioned, lack of resources across the sector. So that is also important. Like some of us, we are working with different operational activities or area, but nobody I found that dedicated in the country level who can work on all those things, you know, so which is very important, because we have to give time. Lack of coordination. We have found that some of the cases, we have changed the specification of the goods, but other organizations are using. So I think it is the best time, actually, we have to step up in a collaborative way. So not only, even sometimes we found that suppliers are not interested to make the changes, because it's the only part that we want to change, but other part they don't want. So we need to have a good coordination for that. And short-term cost focus, like definitely there might be some cost issue, budgetary issue. So people don't think that it has a long-term opportunities and long-term benefits. So we are only stuck into short-term cost focus. And budget constraint that is related to these issues. Like definitely to change something, we need some additional budget. Definitely, I hope that donor will understand, and they already understand, and they committed to greening our supply chain. So definitely it will come. Thank you, and over to you, Nishani.
Thanks so much, Arifur. Really, both Catherine and Arifur, thanks so much for your presentation. A lot of food for thought, and we will come back to questions. And in terms of time, I'm going to move on to our next priority. Samantha, over to you, and to Rose to share about priority action 3.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Samantha, co-facilitator of the Donor Greening Group. I'm just going to take a few minutes here to briefly introduce this priority action, implement measures to significantly minimize GHG from travel and transport. As we all know, travel and transport are essential to delivering humanitarian assistance, both for staff, but also for items. However, I think we can all admit that the way that we've been traveling has not necessarily been the most efficient. So really, with the Donor Greening Group, we've been talking a lot about this, and it's reducing air travel is a real low-hanging fruit, simply because organizations have direct control over their travel policies and the way they travel. It's an action that can be a bit more easily implemented than, for instance, reducing emissions with regards to supply chains. Of course, it has a lot of also co-benefits in terms of cost through promoting online participation, limiting international air travel, reducing the use of business class and first class travel, which are both very expensive and very emissive. And it has a lot of co-benefits in terms also of the localization agenda. With regards to transport, you could go to the next slide. I'm going to let Rose unpack this a bit. But there are also already a lot of things that are going on in regards in the sector to reduce emission and environmental impact with regards to joint transport, pooling of resources. We've got examples from ULO, from a lot of organizations, also promoting switching from air to sea freight. But of course, that includes a lot of supply planning and perhaps better procurement planning. I'm now going to hand over to Rose, who's going to, from the Fleet Forum, who's going to speak about efforts around right-sizing vehicles and pooling of resources. Over to you, Rose.
Thanks, Samantha. Yeah, so thanks for the opportunity to talk about this priority 3 on reducing emissions from travel and transport. If we can go to the next slide. For those of you who don't know Fleet Forum, so we are a member association. And our members consist of INGOs, UN agencies, but also the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. And we work closely together in a membership capacity with suppliers to the sector, and then specifically road transport related suppliers. So vehicle suppliers, but also organizations that are supplying telematics systems and fleet management systems. Now, before I go into the really into priority 3, if you go to the next slide, then I want to share with you that in 2003, we already with our member community, we came up with the Fleet Forum commitments, as they are called now, working closely together with our members who are operating vehicle fleets. To commit to 3 targets. One is to set a baseline and target specifically on fleet-related emissions, because we saw that a lot of our members had aspirational or had commitments to their organizational emissions, but not specifically for fleet-related emissions. And where we said, okay, well, if we want to set a baseline and targets, then also set some indicators. And our member community who signed up to these commitments have pledged the aspirational commitments to reduce their emissions by starting to use Euro 3 vehicles or higher, but also to actively participate in vehicle sharing initiatives or ride sharing initiative in their operating countries. Now, since we signed those commitments with the members, we also are actively supporting them in the form of working groups to see, okay, what are the common challenges and what is it that we need to solve in order for organizations to achieve these commitments. If we can go to the next slide. So one of the things that we have developed with the support of DG ECHO and CDCS and in partnership with HULO is an environmental self-assessment tool specifically related to fleet and transport, where organizations can assess themselves to see, okay, where is my organization now and how can I improve? So the self-assessment looks into 4 key areas. The first one is management and monitoring. The other one is planning and procurement. The third one is waste and maintenance. And the last one is people management. Because when DG ECHO launched the MARE, we discussed and really thought like, okay, it's good that we have the MARE, the minimum environmental requirements and recommendations, but now how do we hold organizations accountable, or how do we encourage organizations to also live up to these requirements and recommendations? So the tool is really to assess organizations' approach and give them recommendations how they can improve. It is an online tool. It is available in 4 languages, and I would really encourage everybody on the call to look at this, but also to use it when you have when you write your funding proposals to support your environmental aspirations and add it to the funding proposal to see, okay, we are making progress in how we are looking at our fleet and transport performance. If we go to the next one. The other practice that I would like to shine some light on is on the vehicle sharing and vehicle and ride sharing between INGOs. Projects that we have been running, and the example that I really want to dive into is the one that we did in Lebanon. And this is one of the most effective ways for organizations to reduce emissions, but also to reduce costs. We all know that now funding is an issue. And if we pull together, if we share our resources, if we look at, okay, how can we on routes where we often travel together, we all have to go to the same airport, same meetings, same projects. how can we now well, fill up our vehicles so that in total we can reduce the size of our fleet and therefore also reduce emissions. So we do have projects ongoing, and how organizations can start implementing this is by just starting. It is joining initiatives, it's learning, it's failing, it is adapting, and it's learning again. Of course, we also have a toolkit, and I will later on, I will share the link to the toolkit with a lot of practical guidance and advice. Because vehicle sharing and ride sharing projects, this is not a technical solution. This is really a change management solution where organizations need to look at how they use their fleet, how they use their transport and transform from a vehicle-centric mobility to more in shared mobility and looking also at soft mobility. Vehicle sharing and ride sharing is extremely beneficial for those organizations who want to show leadership and want to make key decisions all the way up and down in how they look at their transport policies and practices, and to ensure that the organization can make it happen. If we can go to the next slide, please. So some of the lessons learned that we have from our project in Lebanon, we did a study, or a group URD did a lessons learned exercise for us, and we had some very valuable findings there. So what we found is it is not enough to have the, let's say, the organizational commitment which organizations have put on paper to leave it there. Organizations really need to go into practical action, and like I said, the best way is to join an initiative and see how you can learn together with the other partners in vehicle sharing or ride sharing initiatives. Organizations also can drive by participating in vehicle and ride sharing initiatives. They can also drive societal changes. We are also working in a sector that we all have access to organizational vehicles. We drive around in big 4x4s through the cities, and by participating in vehicle sharing and ride sharing initiatives, we also show that by doing it for work, that we can also turn this behavior into our private lives, and therefore also already reducing emissions. Organizations need to lead by example and to challenge the idea of individual mobility as the norm, and encourage positive shifts in social behavior. And what we mean with that is in the Lebanon project, what we saw was that the partners were starting to share vehicles. In fact, they started to hire a bus on a specific route in Lebanon from Beirut to Zahle, and those trips were shared. But what organizations did not do was then, because they were sharing those trips, is then reduce the size of our fleet. So we need to go a step further, because otherwise we are actually growing our fleet as a result of vehicle sharing. So we really need to add right sizing and right profiling of the fleet as part of a vehicle sharing project. And then the last very valuable lesson that we learned was that we have to move as organizations, we have to move past the fear of administrative risks, and really trust the power of the collective action. And the example that we have is that what we hear in many of our vehicle sharing initiatives or ride sharing initiatives is, oh, either the donor won't allow us to share vehicles, or my security won't allow us. And if you look at it, if you sit together with other organizations and you sort of compare the policies that you have in terms of security, in terms of insurance, there's a lot of overlap. And there we need to start trusting the power of collective action. If we can go to the next slide. So I saw one of the questions in the chat around electric vehicles, and another learning that I want to share is that electric vehicles are not the solution. We hear a lot of organizations that want to replace their complete fleet because they see it as a, let's say, a quick but expensive method to reduce their emissions. And to us, what we have learned is that electric vehicles are just one of the solutions. Together with Court and with the support of Help Logistics, we did, and some of our members like ICRC and UNHCR, we did a study on the environmental performance of electric vehicles versus ICE vehicles. And what we found is that the environmental benefit of these vehicles is really context specific. It doesn't make sense to put electric vehicles in place in places where you still are charging from a very dirty grid. Now, what we promote and what we encourage our member organizations to do is to apply the avoid, shift, improve methodology, where you avoid all the unnecessary travel, because the cleanest kilometer is the kilometer that you don't drive. Once you have taken out all those unnecessary kilometers, then you move into more environmentally friendly modes. Look into, can we walk in cities where it is safe? Can we use soft mobility? Can we use public transport? Everything to avoid that you are sitting in a car. And then with the travel that you cannot avoid, there you want to look into more fuel efficient modes, training drivers on eco-driving, but also looking into hybrid and electric vehicles, but also moving away from the standard heavy duty 4x4s into maybe sedans or lighter vehicles. Last but not least, on my slides, in the next slide, maybe also encouragement for the donor community. We would really like to encourage donors to encourage organizations to submit the environmental self-assessment tool with their donor funding applications, not to make it a criteria, but really to encourage organizations to work on their fleet sustainability performance. Fund vehicle and ride sharing between organizations and make it a condition that those individual fleet sizes of organizations then reduce as an outcome of these projects. Actively apply the avoid, shift, improve method when reviewing and evaluating project proposals. And lastly, but I think most importantly, is to take away the excuse that the donor won't allow it, by encouraging organizations also to be able to change the status quo of, oh, we have project vehicles, or we cannot move with others in our vehicles. And that is it. I'm handing over to Natasha.
Wonderful. Thanks, Rose. And thank you as well, Sam, for unpacking the last priority. I'll now jump in with priority 10. We'll take a closer look at what it means to support access to sustainably produced food, preferably locally produced. And I'm joined by Madhu from Acted, who will bring us a real experience on the ground and what this means. As Fiona mentioned, food security and agricultural programs account for a large chunk of the humanitarian sector's emissions. And in agriculture, the production phase, the growing, harvesting, and processing, actually generates the bulk of emissions because it's highly resource and energy intensive. For example, applying synthetic fertilizers releases nitrous oxide, a potent greenhouse gas. Irrigating fields and powering tractors consume large amounts of water and energy. And certain farming practices, like intensive livestock production and even rice cultivation, can emit methane, another greenhouse gas. So in other words, it's these steps that are long before food is even transported or packaged that make agriculture one of the biggest contributors to the sector's emissions. And because of this, the donors are setting this priority, calling on the sector to shift food assistance from simply delivering calories to delivering food that is also environmentally sustainable. And this includes, for example, prioritizing low carbon food produce wherever possible. This connects back to the priority 2, which could mean procuring products with lower carbon footprints like through these certified options that we have. You know, we have the certified sustainable palm oil or sustainable rice platform, but it recognizes that these sustainable alternatives are first of all not yet available for every product or accessible in every market. So it also means supporting producers to improve agricultural practices. And importantly, this doesn't just reduce carbon emissions. Working with producers is also an opportunity to help strengthen local livelihoods and build resilience and connect directly with some of the other food security objectives we might have with our local agricultural producers. And I'm sure Madhu will have much more to say on this. But I will say there are quick wins, as mentioned by a number of people earlier, the improving at the planning stage, as well as in packaging and storage, we can prevent food waste. Food waste doesn't just mean wasted meals, but it's also wasted resources like water and energy and the land used to produce it. And overall, this priority really invites us to rethink our food assistance in a way that supports both people and the planet at the same time. So with that, I'm excited to turn over to Madhumita to share more about how ACTED is taking on this work, and looking forward to hearing more.
Thank you for that introduction, Natasha. So from ACTED, we started tracking our carbon footprint in 2017. And sorry, I want to apologize in advance because it's a bit beyond time and I'm joining from a car. So I apologize for the background noise. But yes, as I was saying, ACTED, we started tracking our carbon footprint in 2017. And so far, we found that our humanitarian distributions are the largest part of our carbon footprint. And you can see here on the slide the share of the different products, items that we procure or we give vouchers for, and when we track the carbon footprint. And rice and cows obviously make sense, have a large amount of carbon footprint, but rice, just by the volume that we procure, has a huge carbon footprint. If you can press next. The table below is the categories. As you can see, our purchased goods and services, which mostly consists of humanitarian assistance, including food assistance, cash, vouchers, non-food items. This is by far the largest volume of our emissions, and the travel at the third row includes our international travel. So compared to our local and international travel, just the items we procure is so much more higher. If you can press next. And this is a table of the countries with the 10 most highest emissions for ACTED missions. Syria is the largest because we have the largest humanitarian portfolio and the largest distributions of vouchers in Syria. And as you can see, all of the missions, most of the missions listed there are humanitarian missions. And this includes, like I said, food, non-food items, cash, vouchers, all of this. Next slide. To put this in perspective, the food vouchers alone were 20,300 tons of CO2 equivalent in Syria. This was mostly driven by rice, canned meat, sunflower oil, sugar, like as you can see the list of the food support. And as someone said earlier, local does not always mean less emissions. So we are obviously giving vouchers for procurement of local items. And this does contribute quite significantly to our carbon emissions. And we try to sort of compare what this would mean just for Syria in terms of the carbon emissions. This is equivalent to 5,000 round trips, flights from Asia to France, which is obviously quite a lot, or 5,800 cars in 1 year. Just to offset this carbon just from our food voucher distribution in Syria, it would take 1.23 million trees to offset it in 1 year. And this would be equivalent to 54,000 households' use of electricity in 1 year in some of the poorest African countries. So this again to highlight that even though the per beneficiary emission can be quite low. Just by the volume that we procure, our emissions are quite large, and that's why Syria is one of our biggest emissions. So when we started tracking this in 2017, obviously we're interested in replacing some of the items and trying to figure out what drives the cost, but this can be quite complex. We are constrained by what kind of items we can include in these food vouchers or food kits or NFIs, because the sector sets these guidelines in compliance with donor regulations. We're constrained by procurement guidelines, which make it quite difficult, especially if you're trying to procure locally. There might not always be the options available for less carbon intensive products. So that does make it quite difficult. And then, of course, there are also the issues that it's not always possible to have an alternative solution in humanitarian contexts where markets are not fully well developed. So what we have been trying to do is work through humanitarian funding in these kind of complex humanitarian contexts with alternative programs that support sustainable local food production and try to green the value chains that we are working on. If you can go to the next slide. Some of the interesting interventions that we've done, I've tried to highlight a few examples of the kinds of interventions we did. We are heavily promoting across our missions alternative feed production because a lot of the carbon footprint in the food kits that we supply comes from either meat or dairy or eggs. And when we try to track where a lot of this carbon comes from, it's usually not always, but quite heavily influenced by the feed procurement, especially in the Middle East and North Africa region, where a lot of the feed might be purchased from shops and in some contexts even imported into the countries. So this is an example of a project we did in Syria where we promoted microferns as an alternative feed for chickens, and it's actually quite successful. And this not only has a much lower carbon emission, but actually has a much lower water footprint compared to traditional feed that is usually purchased for chickens. Next slide. And then someone mentioned solarization earlier. So, we also look at compost production. Obviously, in a lot of the countries that we work in, one of the largest causes of emissions in landfills is organic waste, and in MENA, 60%, over 60% of household waste is organic waste. So we're looking at compost production, but we're moving away from traditional compost. A lot of these techniques can produce compost that are really low in microbial health. So we have also tested in the past. We have a lot of experience trying to implement compost production with farmers, and it usually fails. Farmers, even though we help them supply compost, they also procure other chemicals like fertilizers. And one of the key reasons is the compost is usually doesn't have any microbial health, and we realize that their production can drop by up to 50% when we tell them start using compost, stop using fertilizers. So instead, we are piloting these technical and innovative approaches for making microbial rich compost, and we're seeing quite a bit of success. Farmers are replicating these methodologies and actually more open to the idea of reducing their fertilizer use, if not stopping it completely. Next slide. And then someone talked about solarization earlier. So this is something we definitely promote quite heavily. We're working on solarization of boreholes, solarization for pumping for farmers. And then in parallel, to ensure a do no harm approach, ACTED has a lot of other mitigation measures to prevent over abstraction of groundwater, especially in contexts like Syria, where there's already an issue with illegal bore wells and over abstraction and massive droughts in a lot of the part of the country. So we work on and water use agreements, we work on water associations, we work with local water authorities on training them on abstraction levels. We are working on data collection, so we understand how much water, groundwater is being taken, and trying to have evidence-based decision-making with the local authorities, which I really wanted to highlight as an important mitigation measure. Next slide. One of the other innovations we are looking at is rainwater harvesting, and there are many different approaches that we are piloting in Syria. But this one, we've had a bit of success in some parts of Syria where we directly harvest the rainwater that falls on greenhouses into tanks and then help farmers reduce the amount of groundwater that they require. And this has actually been quite successful in some parts of Syria. Obviously, it requires a certain base level of rainfall, but we also notice that farmers sometimes are forced to truck in water. So this reduces the amount of water trucking and therefore can have a huge impact on the carbon emissions for the farmers. Next slide, please. We are, of course, distributing drip irrigation systems and other ways of reducing their water use. This we try to combine with the solarization so that the number of hours that they're actually pumping reduces, and therefore, their electricity consumption also reduces. Next slide, please. And lastly, this is another interesting innovation. Like I said, we are quite heavily promoting alternative feed production. And this was using hydroponics barley as an alternative feed for sheep, especially in the lean seasons. So this has dual benefits. In the lean seasons, it reduces the need for grazing, open grazing on large rangelands, which are already quite stressed and can have a huge impact because, of course, rangelands have a lot of carbon sequestration potential, and when they're overexploited, it leads to their degradation, which then can lead to more carbon emissions. So that's a huge benefit. But also in the lean season, sometimes farmers are forced to kill their sheep or don't have access to feed, or they have to supplement with store-bought feed, which can be brought in from very long distances away. This also has a huge carbon emission impact. So by being able to provide local feed in these sort of innovative approaches, we can have a huge impact. So these are just some innovations that we are promoting. Of course, this requires donors to have flexibility to support these kind of local food production. And the timeline for these kind of projects are a little bit different because they can't be achieved in a 3-month, 6-month or a short scale. They do require a little bit of turnaround. So when donor flexibility allows for these kind of interventions, or even some way to transition from a humanitarian assistance package where we have to do a distribution, but then we can transition into these kind of medium-term interventions would be really helpful to reduce our carbon footprint in these contexts. So that's primarily what I want to talk about. I don't know if there are any questions or.
Thanks so much, Madhu. And really, honestly, there's so much rich examples that we've seen, and there's a lot more that are there. But this particular conversation has been useful, I think, to see practically what organizations have been doing on the ground in terms of reducing their environment footprint and carbon emissions, etc. And I would like to find out if there are any others who would be sharing any questions. I have seen some questions already being answered on the chat by organizations and by the speakers. Thank you so much. Maybe one of the questions that we would like to share is, and maybe to hear from one of the donors more on the not just on the chat but on air, would be on the challenges on the short-term cost focus. And we've heard this in terms of solar, we've heard this in terms of even the agriculture practices that we're seeing on the ground, or even the work that we need to do to make sure that these are long-term programs. Any of the donors like to actually take that particular question to see, if there are 3-year costs, what is this sort of, is there budgets that are available or funding that's available for such initiatives, because our humanitarian funding is short-term cycle. Anybody else who would like to, and I'd like to actually put it over to the donors. Anyone who'd be interested, please do put their hands up. Any donors who'd be wanting or trying to? Yeah, go ahead, Carolina. Thanks.
Yeah, again, others, please do also come in. I'll just share from ECHO's side. So this is a question we get often for sure, and just wanted to go back to saying that actually over the last few years, we've been putting emphasis in our humanitarian implementation plans and our HIPs on multi-year funding. So we recognize that this is needed in the sector, not just for environmental initiatives, but also for other priorities that we share. So definitely, we encourage partners to send us proposals that have multi-year funding, especially in contexts that are more protracted, where we know that our presence will be there, unfortunately for some time. We do see a lot of course emergency response proposals are more short term, but we're open to also these multi-year proposals, and we do highlight that it's not just for disaster preparedness, which is kind of the more, let's say, known longer term policy area of ECHO, but very much also for environmental priorities, and on the energy side specifically, but also for other interventions that have this return on investment potential. We encourage partners to demonstrate a cost-benefit analysis. It doesn't have to be very complex, but to just show us a projected return on investment, how many years would it take, and that helps us understand the justification of the initial upfront cost and your expected return on investment. And of course, especially for partners with whom we've worked with for a long time, definitely that trust is there, and I think we are open to these more multi-year proposals as a result. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Carolina. And that is, important for organizations to know that there are such opportunities with the 3-year HIPs and other avenues of funding, and we do share some of these funding proposals through our newsletters and updates, as well as the Charter Secretary, because we understand this is something important to hear from. And I'm not sure if Amy is online. Somebody else, is that Alexander?
Maybe I can jump in, yes. I just wanted to say, there is no clear rule at STC, but we are very much in favor of sustainable solution, which includes renewable energy. We are supporting a lot of, for example, solarization project, for example, solarization of boreholes, just as an example. It can even be more expensive, if it's a more sustainable solution. So I think, yes, SDC really favors these more sustainable energy solutions. Over.
Thanks so much, Alexandra. And I think Amy from the Global Platform for Action is also online, as there were so many questions on solarization. I would like to hand over to her as well if she is online. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, hi colleagues, great to see everyone. I think those are the priority actions around 8 and 9, so around access to clean cooking fuels, so phasing out from or enabling cleaner cooking fuels and supply chains to move away from firewood and charcoal, and then looking around the use of renewable energy for both the humanitarian offices and then also for communities. So as at the GPA, we have a team of 12 people, and that are really looking at supporting the wider sector with this, and we have a lot of tools and experience on that. I think in general, the kind of barriers around short-term budgets of the agencies kind of make this challenge quite hard. But kind of what we're doing is bridging between the private sector and humanitarian organizations who are looking to solarize their offices. And we also work with a lot of quite great off-grid solar innovators and companies who are bringing solar lanterns or solar mini grids into more remote areas. So that's something that we're happy to connect the sector on. I'm happy to speak further.
Thanks a lot, Amy. And we're mindful of our timing. And thanks so much for all the interventions that have been shared on the chat. We'll be sharing the videos, the recording, and the links also that has been shared. Please do check out the environment guidance. We also have a lot of the similar things that were shared here on that. And I'm noting on our timing and just making sure that we're all want to hear also from donors. We have Hannah Jans, who is the Director, Strategy and Policy of DG ECHO. We'd like to hand you over for some remarks. So over to you as well.
Thank you very much, Nishani, and thank you. I was able only to listen to part of your conversation for the last half an hour, but it was extremely useful also to indeed dive into the different examples of leadership, collaboration, and innovation that shapes the greening of humanitarian aid. So congratulations to all. Let me start by saying that, of course, we are very happy that today you joined the launch of Common Donor Priority Actions on Greening Humanitarian Aid, and the 5 big donors, if you like, who had the pleasure to be part of the first short statement part. We are among them, and we are very grateful and for all the support and all the expertise that could be introduced to this and is going to be introduced through this action. This is, of course, a strong signal from our side, and I'm speaking about the donors here, of our shared commitment and strong encouragement to keep including these actions in the humanitarian aid or operations, and especially when we see constantly that other donors are scaling back or changing narratives. And we should fight that, not only by words or announcements, which of course are always very important, and advocacy is equally important, but also with indeed operations on the ground and real projects which can help to understand that this makes a difference. These 10 actions, from phasing out of fossil fuels generators to supporting access to clean cooking and reducing emissions linked to travel and transport, provide clear guidance and unify directions for the sector. And of course, they reflect also collective intent to align policies, reduce duplications and contradictions, which we also see sometimes. And this is crucial in this difficult funding reality that partners are finding themselves, where we indeed cannot afford inefficiencies. We know that sometimes partners hesitate to propose greener solutions in their humanitarian response because they are concerned that they will be somehow this will somehow disadvantage them, right? That the project at the selection stage will be taken out because of the higher cost or being seen as peripheral issue. And we should collectively make the statement of support in order to dispel this worry. And we want very much stand by that as donors. We are, of course, as ECHO committed, as Carolina also mentioned just now, to reduce food and environmental footprint of humanitarian aid, and we want to support our partners in it. And I want to underline and undertake this firm commitment further. We, of course, continue to implement minimum environmental requirements and fund actions that support the humanitarian system, such as Secretariat of a Climate Charter or NEED Plus environmental screening tool in terms of trainings. We are encouraged, really, by 477 organizations that have signed the Climate and Environment Charter. Is really a number that speaks loudly about how committed we all are in this process. And we are very happy that there is a growing number of donors aligning their policies and funding accordingly, even if there are some who go out from the charter. And this we also have to say here in that very conversation. This is a responsibility and opportunity issue at the same time, and we should always advocate about that loudly. So I'll keep encouraging other donors to subscribe to these priority actions. This is not a closed document, of course, and it's a living statement towards our common partners, and I hope that you can help me with that as well, that we keep asking others to join in. So this renewed commitment that we leave today on the table to translate priorities into practical action, to support our partners in doing the same, to ensure our humanitarian response does not only save lives, but also safeguards the planet and generations to come, which is in a way saving lives. It's an important element of what we do on a daily basis. So well, I hope that we can next time we meet and take stock or discuss what next excellent innovative ideas we could introduce. We also can be proud of more and more organizations joining us and supporting the cause. So thank you very much for having me at the very end, and looking forward to further cooperation around greening of humanitarian aid. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Yance. And I think it's a testimony to what we're hearing from organizations. There's a huge amount of support that we're seeing from the donors, but also from organizations, rightly, as you mentioned. And there's also a question on advocacy, and one of the key advocacy work we do together, especially with ECHO and the other supporters of the Charter, is to ensure that we're bringing together, just like this particular group, we're bringing signatories of the Charter, organizations that are already working on the ground, sharing their experiences, sharing their challenges, so that we are able to have these sometimes hard conversations to say, you know, we are struggling at the moment as a sector, but how can we move this forward together and to make sure that climate and environment stays on the radar, that it is a priority in these conversations of the humanitarian reset, where it is saving lives. It is a crisis that we're an existential crisis that we're all facing. So also to share that we are, as we're up on time, there is a survey that we're asking participants to join in. We will be having follow-up with the donor greening group facilitation team and the donor greening group to see what are some of the challenges where more support is required to advance the greening priority actions. So please do take the survey and share your feedback, challenges, opportunities, and we'll be in touch with you on that. So thank you to all the speakers, to all the donors, to all of you participants for your really useful questions and challenges that you've been put forward. And we hope to continue these conversations again. Thanks to the donor greening group facilitation team, Samantha and Fiona, and my colleague Natasha, and to all of you online and to all our speakers. Thank you so much. Have a lovely rest of the day. See you.